UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Live on connectonair.com and remoteradioweek.org.
Connect on Air.
Remote Radio Week proposes distinct programs in English, French, Spanish and Arabic, featuring experts, examples, debates and technical tips. UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Get ready for a week devoted to helping radio stations broadcast remotely. Live on connectonair.com and remote-radio-week.org.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where it is in the week you are tuning in from. It is UNESCO's Remote Radio Week, day 5 of 5. I'm Andy Leve. Pleased to be here once again. Of course, Remote Radio Week is organized by UNESCO in partnership with the World Health Organization, and it is an online training program that's aimed at building the capacity of local radio stations to produce accurate and professional radio content in the event of containment measures or emergencies, including financial difficulties. In this discussion, we'll be looking at how to deliver a quality audio program on all listening devices that's live and on demand, and how to then go about adapting your content. We've got parts of the world sharing their insights around our umbrella topic. Today, we've got Vasuki, who is joining us from India, I believe. Vasuki, you're up first, and you're going to be talking to us about how Pakistan and Mongolia specifically have used community radio together with social media, particularly during COVID, to disperse information and, of course, to continue the conversations that I had onto the online space. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andy, and hello to all the experts on the panel and the audiences who are listening to this video cast. My talk is basically about how we trained a bunch of community radio stations in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, and in Mongolia during the COVID period on how to bring social media broadcasting into their work so that they could expand, engage, and dialogue with the communities. One of the things about community radio is that it works with the communities. That is, communities, come to the radio station. They are involved in decision making, production, broadcast, and all of these things. But COVID taught us a lesson that none of this was possible. Okay, and especially when youngsters aren't able to access the radio station, social media broadcasting comes in. Social media broadcasting is an interesting thing to work with for community radio stations, and especially with the youngsters, and of course other demographics as well, because obviously there has been a rapid increase in mobile phone usage. Social media can also inform us of our potential audiences and participants. It is an amplifier. It goes beyond traditional, analog broadcasting. And although there are phone-ins and things like that that can make FM broadcasting or local broadcasting interactive, social media can expand and amplify that interaction and make it a lot more interactive, and also provide instant response to what you put out on social media. So what we did was to conduct a 5-day workshop for both radio stations in Dhaka in Bangladesh and also in Mongolia, which was coordinated by the UNESCO office in China, Beijing. And we basically went through how to use social media broadcasting to increase community engagement. We also looked at the various tools and techniques that can be used for social media broadcasting. And very importantly, we looked at the ethical dimensions of using social media for community radio stations. Uh, Basically,
let's focus on that
yeah.
point there, Vasuki. Sorry to interrupt you, but I find it quite interesting, particularly in an age where fake news is quite rife, and in an age where names specifically mentioned, but have come under the fire quite recently about spreading or being a source of misinformation. So whilst, Facebook, there's the name, Twitter, and a place for people to converse and engage, the fake news aspect that is quite rampant in those spaces. How do you circumvent that?
So, in fact, what you're saying is absolutely right. But the fact also remains that when a lot of misinformation was being spread by various other sources, in many places there is evidence to show that community radios, worked a lot to put out, factual information and try to arrest the spread of fake news among its communities. Community radios did that by way of broadcasting on their radio stations, and also did that by using social media. We have seen examples from Bangladesh. We have seen examples from Africa where community radios re-verified information from various sources, and then put out the true story in front of the audiences. Therefore, yes, community radios do have a major responsibility, and quite credibly, they have delivered their responsibility quite well during the COVID pandemic. And because the principle is about working with the communities, they will continue to provide factual information as we go along.
Right.
So, of course, the training also had to do with capacity building, capacity enhancing, and things like that. Therefore, what were the kind of content one needs to post and when to post were all part of the workshop. So, for example, we could look at community radios, could look at using social media broadcasting, social media platforms to put out 2 to 3 pieces of information that they would share from other sources, obviously after verifying the information. They could also look at promoting content that they're broadcasting on community radio. They could also cross promote. On community radio, they could promote their social media handles, and on their social media handles, they could promote the community radio itself. One important thing to look at is to determine what is the best day and time to post content on social media. There are quite a few tools that can help you schedule your content, online tools. Some of them are free to use with limited capabilities, but there are paid options as well. Since community radios will not be able to afford all these online packages that run into hundreds of dollars, it might be important for them to have 1 or 2 people in the community radio station itself handling their social media handles. That'll possibly make it a lot more easier for them to run the radio station. Everybody uses smartphones these days. How does and everybody is hitting on the video camera button or the still camera button, clicking photographs, recording videos, etc. But it's important for us to know a little bit about the aesthetics of composition, using appropriate lighting and audio levels, etc., to make videos, short videos, promoting your program or promoting your talent on the show, local talent in the community. You could use smartphones to make use of such videos. I'm sure experts on the other panels have also spoken about the software and hardware that can be used by community radio stations There are a number of open source or free licensed but free options available. For example, there is a Voice Pro or the WavePad or the Voxbox available for Android and iOS phones. There is also the Elite Motion or KineMaster available to edit videos. You can shoot videos on your mobile, and you can also edit them with a lot of effects and titles and things like that. Short videos, 1 minute, 30-second, 1 minute videos that can go on social media platforms. Besides that, there are also quite a few web-based applications that can help. Some of them are free, like the most famous and the most popular web app that one can think of is the Canva. Canva.com provides users with a number of templates by which you can create posters, by which you can create using which you can create videos. You can create audio. Audio visuals. You can also create infographics using pictochart.com. And then if you want to create very short animations just to show the life, the scene behind the scenes in your radio station, or just to bring in an element of humor on social media broadcasting, there is the animoto.com, where you can create short animated videos and put them out on broadcasting. So there are quite a few ideas on content that one can use in terms of creating content and putting them out on social media broadcasting. For example, you could share content from your blog or your website. You could share content about clips from local events, the top 5 programs on your radio station, introducing the local guests or local talent. You could probably talk about local job openings in your communities. Pose an important question. So, is there vaccine available in your community? If yes, mention your locality and tell us where the vaccination is available. So those kind of things help other members in the community. One could also look at some of the best practices, especially in rural areas where people are involved in farming. Best agricultural practices, for example. You could also put out best practices in terms of using what I call the financial apps. What kind of information to leave on those apps when you're transacting with money online, things like that. You could also look at promoting citizen reporters, give away a monthly prize maybe once in a while on a quiz that you might want to conduct. The social media also provide a great way to get feedback on the programs that you broadcast. You can also share MP3s of your programs on almost every social media broadcasting platform. Facebook, Twitter, you can share audios, you can share videos. So that kind of makes it interactive. Now, the only thing to remember is people might say, oh, it's quite expensive doing all of this. Thankfully, it's not. There are quite a few free and open source options available. The important thing to remember is to have a social media policy for your community radio station. Make sure that you train at least 1 or 2 people in handling all the social media handles. Also train them in being responsible, in being ethical in their posts, and
of course,
more importantly, train them on how to engage with the audiences. Somebody reacts or responds to a post, one should know how to negotiate with them, how to get into a dialogue with them without offending your audiences. So these are some of the skills that might be useful for community radio stations to
Thank you very
follow.
much, Vasuki.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Andy.
very much. Yes, I think that, in a nutshell, there's lots of cross-pollination that can certainly happen from a radio perspective into the digital space, and some learnings that can be applied when, as you said, if you are a digital content administrator of platforms for a station, you can apply that same sort of candor that you have on air to the digital space as well, because ultimately it is all under the umbrella of being good communicators, facilitating conversations and dialogues, etc. And Kim, I saw you nodding profusely there as Vasuki spoke. So it's over to you, where you'll be talking to us more about podcasts, reading some statistics which are quite alarming, but in a good way, that there's over 2 million podcasts. I'm sure there are more, but it's over 2 million, they say. So the audio journey continues. We've gone from the terrestrial radio platform, where it's AM, FM, and DAB, and now the podcast era is it's here. It's here to disrupt, but in a good way. And I know that you've been doing some great work in Egypt, so it's over to you talking to us about what makes a good podcast.
Thank you so much, Andy. And yeah, Vasuki really covered quite a bit. So we're certainly going to have a little bit of overlap, but it's because with community radio and with podcasting, you're really trying to work with limited resources. Not everyone has a big budget of these commercial podcast production companies. And that's where I want to kind of start out foundationally. We're not really in competition with them. The point of podcasting and community radio is having a voice, so that you have something to say, and we want to provide you with a platform to get that point across to an audience. So foundationally, I think that's where we need to start. What do you have to say? And once you can sort of use the basics, what's the quote, do what you can with what you have. So starting with that, and Vasuki mentioned, you have a smartphone. And these smartphones are, as we know, essentially computers in our pockets. So there's so many things that you can do with the device. And so for people who are on really tight budgets, I would say that let's focus on your content and then start to go with the technology. Because again, budgets are probably really tight. But I do want to break down, my comments into 4 areas. And again, there's some overlap with what Vasuki was saying as well. But the 4 areas where you kind of want to put your budget, or think about how, if you have money, how you're going to spend it. So the 4 areas are a place to host your podcast. That's one budget item. Hardware and software, that's 2 separate categories, and then marketing. And out of the 4 of those, hosting, hardware, software, and marketing, if I didn't have a budget, or I had a small budget, I would put the money in hosting. Hosting ends up being the most important, because there are tons of free places out there, but oftentimes it's like you get what you pay for. So, when you're paying for a host platform, at least you have some control of that content while you're paying for it. Of course, if your subscription runs out and they yank your content from that site, that's problematic. So you want to have a backup to whatever you post online. And one of my free backups for years, ever since I moved to Cairo in 2009, has been the Internet Archive. So that really is a great free place to host your podcast, or at least keep your archive back there, because it does end up staying in place. But some of the newer hosting platforms, or at least the platforms that are out there, are keeping up with technology, and they just try to make it really easy for you to do like a one-click to post your stuff in one spot, and then you can sort of send it to the other platforms like an Apple or Spotify, and some of the other smaller ones as well, like a Stitcher, for example. So that's one of the points I wanted to share with you in terms of budget items and hosting, and where your podcasts live. You want to keep that in mind, because again, one of the problems that we've seen in the digital world is content comes up missing, and you get that 404, like, where's my content? So we want to try to avoid that from happening, of your digital presence being erased just because a company may go out of service or something like that. I do want to move to the hardware, and I'm sure this has been discussed throughout the week on the Remote Radio Week. Hardware is really tricky because we have such global disparities in terms of access. So, who can get what equipment? Not everyone can, not only can you not afford a Shure microphone, which is really good, but how is it going to get to you? In terms of you're going to have to find someone who's traveling, who can, there are just a lot of layers and difficulties in terms of getting good quality equipped hardware. And oftentimes, sometimes you'll get it and it doesn't interface with the technology that you have. So it's just like one thing leads to another, and it leads to a lot of frustration. So with the hardware, I'm less likely to give a template for saying, here's how to do it, because the variables are many in terms of, again, what infrastructures are available to you, what technical knowledge do you have to work with more advanced technology and hardware. And what we're finding is that the smartphones, whether it's iOS or Android, they do have decent microphones. And I don't know that sound engineers can pick up specifically on, hey, you don't have a broadcast microphone. And, and we're listening to a lot of this content for podcasts, at least via earbuds. And so that is, a factor in terms of what kind of audio quality. And I'm not trying to say dumb it down. Again, I'm going back to my original statement of do what you can with what you have. And I don't want people to feel like they have to keep up with the Joneses because someone else has high quality equipment that you need to have it too. Again, if you're focused on that content, you're still going to come out a winner because your content is really strong. And so with the hardware, and again, I won't get into it, like what kind of laptop do you have, if that's what you're recording on. There are many variables that will impact your audio quality. And it's not really hardware, but the space of where you're recording is also important. And that's why I say if you have a smartphone, and of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but I assume that you have a place to live, can you reconfigure a space, in that space that you can use for podcasting? And we've seen this with high profile mainstream reporters who travel, and they'll just go to the hotel room and put together some couch cushions and pillows, and they make it right. They make it work with what they have, and you can configure something similar on a small budget. So that covers hosting and more or less hardware. The software, I think it's getting more and more accessible, and we have access to this, and it's coming at a price point that is relatively free. Many platforms do have a free option before you go to like a premium level or subscription level. But before I go too far down that road, I do want to talk about Anchor. I'm on the fence about Anchor, but it is there and it is available. So, it's one of those, like, you open the app and boom, you're doing your podcast. So there's something to be said about, again, not having the technical skill to produce a podcast, but you can press a button, you can download an app, and you can talk. So there you go. And again, I'm not trying to simplify it. I'm just trying to enable people who have a voice and a concern that they want to get out, and they have a passion for a podcast idea. But there's lots of other software out there, again, for free and for a cost. A lot of people for many years had been using Audacity. And I would, under normal circumstances before this past summer, I would have recommended Audacity as an audio editing platform. A lot of educators were using it, and a lot of independent podcasters, and I believe many of them still are. But if the audience doesn't know that over the summer, apparently the company was purchased. I don't remember all the details, but I do know the key word that kept coming up was spyware. Like, it's been turned into spyware. And it was just an immediate, you need to take a moment to stop and say, how important is it for me to use this tool if it is indeed spyware? And my answer to that is there are other options out there that you can take advantage of. And I know Chris will jump in and we will all sing the praises of Hindenburg. And what I like about Chris, though, is like, if you want to use the tool, he's going to help you use his tool. Like, that's the key. We're going to help you learn how to use it. We're going to give you a price point that really works for you. So I really appreciate their dedication to the community and enabling podcasters again to get their products out there and their shows. The last thing I'll say is the marketing. And so, yeah, Vasuki covered this quite nicely. It's like, yeah, Canva is your friend. Again, a free tool. Right. But I do agree with him as well in terms of you can't do it all. Like I do a podcast called Ekia Master Podcast, Tell Your Story Egypt. And we're working on our next season, which starts on Sunday. It's a food season. But I was trying to do it all. I teach 3 classes and I'm trying to plan PodFest in March. And I just had to hire someone. I'm like, I need you to do a social media strategy. I need you to do these graphics. I need you to, like help. I need help. And so you do want to look at, what kind of team do you need to structure to do some component of what I'm saying? Like if you're going to be the host, do you need a producer, like a technical producer to help produce your podcast? Or do you need that marketing social media person who can help, get the word out and do press releases and things like that? And there shouldn't be, most of the marketing stuff can come at a free cost, but that's probably when you need someone to help out because time is money. And you may want to pay someone to do that. Again, because I'm university affiliated, I can find work study students, I can find interns, I can find people who I can, do an exchange. Like if you give me this, then I can give you this. I had one of my former students do the music for my podcast. And in exchange, he gets a credit in every episode and in the show notes. So looking at creative ways to sort of use resources with people who are just getting into social media, but they need to put something on their resume. And having that title as social media manager of a podcast, even if it's a new and growing podcast, is something very valuable to them. And it's very valuable to community organizations. So try to find that fit where you can come up with creative solutions. And that's the takeaway. Now I'll wrap here is that, what's working for the West may not always work for other communities. And that's where that disruption that Andy mentioned comes in. Like we're looking at those templates and we can see the reasons why they won't work for us. And so you have to know your community to say, who can you go to and what kinds of arrangements can you create that work for the two of you? And on that, I will end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. But before you drop the mic, in a manner of speaking, how do we make a podcast as immersive and as engaging, sort of conversation-like as radio is, right? Because there is sometimes as though you're on the periphery as opposed to being part of a conversation or part of an experience. So what are some of the things that one can do as a producer or as an anchor of a podcast to keep it a flowing conversation? Is music something that should be added, for example?
Yeah, well, this is a really good question. And I have experience in both radio and in podcasting. So I kind of know this topic. But a lot of people have done research. A lot of colleagues have looked at this to say the intimacy that you get with radio, you also often get with podcast. But the simple solution to what you're saying is from like an entrepreneurial model called design thinking. And in design thinking, when entrepreneurs are coming up with their product or idea, as a part of this process, design thinking, there's one part of it where they have to create a prototype. So who is the product being designed for? And when they're creating the prototype of who that audience member is, in our case of podcasts, you have to design, you design your listener, your audience, to the point where I know them so well, you have a name. So I want to say my target audience is a woman who's 30, who's married with 2 kids, and her name is Alicia. So every time I'm talking, I'm thinking I'm talking to Alicia because she, and so I do, it's a very intimate conversation because I feel like I'm doing a one-on-one with her. So I think that brings in that element of you're not distancing. And you often have to say, when you're talking, you and I are in the same boat. You have to really speak as if you're speaking to 1 or 2 people and not such that one to many. As we get in mass communication, we're looking at more of a one-on-one conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And Chris, just from your perspective, and from a technical lens, I know Kim did mention that you are an expert in this particular that Isabel also uses that software. But my question to you is more about what insights you have for broadcasters, storytellers, podcast hosts, everyone in the audio space. How can this digital divide or technical divide between broadcasters, practitioners in the media space, how can they, break down the divide between them and their feedbacks off of the question that I just asked Kim?
Sorry, did you say, or you fell out just as you said, between the broadcasters
and their audiences?
Okay, good. Just wanted to be sure. I think so. Where we come into the picture is very much about helping the broadcasters and the people who have stories to tell them in a way where they can focus on telling their story and where the technology helps them create a high quality product. And I think that one of the areas that I worry about and I know this sounds like barnstorming, but it isn't, is that the democratization of audio, in the sense that you were describing, Vasuki, and Kim, to a certain extent, is that, well, now you have Canva, you have smartphones, and you have cheap phones, so anyone can do anything. And I agree. But one of the areas that's important is still to keep your audience focused on your storytelling by not being distracted too much by lack of technical quality. And so there's a balance that really is delicate. I think, I've grown up with community radio, both in Africa and in Europe, and one of the focuses that I've always had is that if you lose your minimum quality, you often undermine your trustworthiness and your authority. And so a lot of really badly made social media posts or programs are going to undermine your validity as a community media. And it's a balance. It's not, there is no answer. It's just, so what we try to focus on, and I think everyone should, and some of these products do, Canva, for example, make a great professional product, which is actually very accessible. And this has happened, as Vasuki also mentioned, in the last few years. And we're in that kind of stream of providing software tools that are designed for the user, where the focus is the end product rather than the technical specifications and qualifications. And going forward, this is going to get even easier. Soon, Kim, your mobile phone recording will actually not sound like a mobile phone recording, because in the software that you're using, we're going to be using AI to clean up that sound in the same way as a sound engineer might, and that is going to increase the value of the proposal. One of the areas that I mentioned, and this is a little bit off on a sidetrack compared to with the question you asked, but one of the areas that I focus on with community radios is that community radio is a center of knowledge about broadcasting that's been built up over many, many years. And podcasting, to a high degree, is about individual storytelling in a very, as you were describing, Kim, in a very intimate conversation if you're doing it well. And I worry that community radio is going to kind of lose their function if they don't embrace that and facilitate that. So making training, storytelling training, content production training available to the community so that they may go out and make their own podcast, but where we have this access to training which is cheap or free by experience, I think will improve that whole and sometimes I've been in Denmark too long. Sorry, sometimes the words come up in Danish instead of in English. I've only been here 35 years. It's ridiculous. So allow you to hold on to that. Community radio has a function not just of being a point of community dissemination of information, but also of learning how to make sure you verify your content before you send it out, learning how to produce it and fact check it, learning how to project yourself in a way that is consistent, so that you don't lose that authority that a community radio can have. And teaching that to a lot of people improves their ability to be community voices, whether that be alone as podcasters, or but then at the same time avoid a lot of false information being used. I'm quite aware of the time, so I think I'm going to leave Isabel to take us out, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to add them. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I thought Andy was prompting me, or?
I was just handing over.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. And of course, if you do want to go find out more about Chris's product that both Kim and Isabel use, you can do so. It's Hindenburg, and you'll find how to download and get started on your audio creation journey. Yes, Isabel, I do believe that you also use this product. So please do tell us a little bit more about your podcast in terms of why you decided to go in a niche space. But I believe that you don't believe that it's a niche space. So over to you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, everyone. Yeah, I feel I don't really have much to say because you all covered so many things that I think are super important for making like good and engaging audio, which probably is the same. Yeah, I were talking before, Andy. So my podcast is called De Eso No Se Habla, which in English means we don't talk about that, and it's a podcast about silences. And about, well, in Spain, we have a tradition of a long dictatorship that led to many things being unspoken in our country. So we deal with silences. So yeah, I don't consider it to be niche. Actually, I think it's quite the opposite, because we all have, and maybe this is just like a thing that it's only in Spain, but I don't think so. Like there's silences in every family. There are silences in every community. There are silences in every like social history. So it was the topic of silences really helped us create a very, very large community on people who felt they were talking, like our podcasts were talking about what they couldn't talk or what they couldn't express. So without really thinking about it, this community emerged quite naturally. Of course, as Vasuki said, using social media was necessary and was a big success for us. Like we really managed to create a community, but we didn't know it was going to be a community that was so like tight and so focused on healing, actually, which is something I didn't really envision, and I'm not really like a psychotherapist or anything, and it's not what I want to do in my life. But many people feel the podcast is just like fulfilling that issue or fulfilling that problem in Spanish society. So that's so that's something that's about the content. I think I was looking at my notes and just like grabbing on what all of you said. I totally agree with Kim that you should first focus on content. I see so many, I'm part of like so many podcast discussions where we're only talking about the technical part. And I'm very impressed that we all start talking about the technical part without having like a clear idea of what we want to make. And it's like, don't think about the microphone if you don't know what your microphone is for, or what kind of podcast you want to make, or what kind of format you want to make. But I also agree with Chris that only if we make good quality audio, our audio is gonna be really, really engaging. Like sometimes I listen to podcasts that have like very good content, but kind of my ears get tired of listening like to bad editing or to, and I'm like, and I'm dripping out of the content because the editing is not good, or, but I think you're all talking about, like you're both talking about the same thing. So for me, the most important part is like focusing of your audience, as Kim said too. We also work with a POV. We also work with like an avatar of our audience, and we think of that person all the time. This motto I really like if you produce for everyone, you're producing for no one. So I think that's something we should all take into account in podcasting, but not only in podcasting. I think radio is also evolving thanks to podcasting, and I think we at podcasting also, or at least in my case, learned so much about radio, and I think today it really doesn't make a big difference. So I would focus on the content. So I would really give myself a few months to think of what I want to do and the form of that content, which is for me, how I work. Form is part of the content. There's no way I can divide how my podcast is told from what my podcast tells from how it tells it, and that also has to do with the DAW I use, from the platform I use to edit. And also, like, if I have to say just like one thing that hasn't been said, because the rest has been said, I'd say focus on beginnings. I can't stress this enough when I teach audio storytelling. Like, my podcast is an audio storytelling podcast. We make audio documentaries, like very crafted audio documentaries. Some of them are like non-narrated, some of them are narrated, some of them are musicals, some of them are more classical documentaries. But in all of them, one thing that stands out is the beginning. This is a big difference between radio and podcasting, even though I've just said it's the same thing, but this is a big difference. But I think it could really be embraced by radio as well. Did I say audio instead of radio? I meant radio and podcasting.
Same thing.
So yeah, but not radio and podcasting is the same, but it's not the same. And for this case, it's not the same. Is that when you listen to radio, you kind of want to listen to an experience. So when I turn on the radio, I want to listen to the radio. And it doesn't really matter what is on the radio. It's the minority station. I'm used to these voices. I want to listen. Sometimes I tune in the radio because I want to listen to that specific program. But when I listen to a podcast, since there's like 2 million podcasts in the world, I have to be really engaged from minute one. Actually, I'd say from second 30. And you can see the graphics very clearly. Like in my podcast, like 20% of the audience normally like abandons the podcast within the first 30 seconds, 1 minute. So that first minute should be amazing. It should be gold, and should be the moment where you really, really engage your audience, where you make a promise. And the promise is not only what you're gonna say, it's also about how you're gonna say, like, this is me, this is my style, this is what I'm promising you're gonna listen here. And of course, the rest of the podcast is about fulfilling that promise. That's something that takes some craft. But I think, if I had to just add one thing, I'd say focus on the beginnings, and that beginning will also help you know what you want to tell and how you want to tell it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Isabel, for your insights there. And of course, I know that you use Hindenburg software, as I mentioned earlier. Kim, you also use it. Chris has said to me that if you are in the community radio space or you make podcasts, here's something that you may or may not know. They do provide their software for free or heavily discounted for community radio or podcasts in low-income countries. So head on over to hindenburg.com to find out more. We have reached the end of this discussion. I know that we could go on forever and a day, and apologies on my end for sticky internet. We are working remotely. It's the nature of the beast, but I do trust that you heard everything I had to say, but most importantly, that you heard panel had to say. Much appreciated, everybody. Thank you so much for your time, for your insights, and a reminder for those of you who are watching that you can watch this again, share it with your community. RemoteRadioWeek.org is where you can go to find this and all the other videos and sessions and discussions that have been had during the course of this week. Up next, we've got a testimony in video format from Fiji about how social audio is being used to inform people about the COVID pandemic. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Get ready for a week devoted to helping radio stations broadcast remotely. Live on connectonair.com and remote-radio-week.org.
Connect on Air.
UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Live on connectonair.com and remote-radio-week.org.
Connect on Air.
Remote Radio Week proposes distinct